Say the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We are going to start off, I'm going to start off by welcoming Mr. Masterson. On behalf of the school board, I would like to welcome you, Brian, as the new superintendent. I believe I share the excitement of this change, knowing you will continue to communicate with all of us, staff, parents, and community members. Stay visible in our community and work hard to keep HF a great place for our students.
Thank you. I'm super excited, so I'm a little nervous, but I'm very excited.
Does anybody else have anything to say?
No, you covered it.
All right.
I'm glad, I'm happy, I can't wait to be here with you.
Thank you. I share the feeling.
I second that. I'm excited.
Thank you.
All right, Dave, do you have any questions on attendance?
No, I've seen it before.
All right, do we have any additions or corrections to the board agenda, Brian?
I did have a correction on letter K on the bid recommendations. I had typed that the savings from Slims was going to be $249.42 a month. It is actually $249.42 for the year would have been savings. So I did change that in the electronic agenda. I had put month, but it should have been per year.
Okay, so we have an agenda with that correction. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? The motion passes 7-0. Open forum. Rules for open forum, 3 minutes per speaker. The open forum shall not take more than 15 minutes. No complaints about individual staff members. All presenters will conduct their business in a manner that meets community standards for decorum. The board will not take action on items presented in open forum. Has anybody signed up ahead of time? And does anybody wish to speak? Moving along. The next is a consent agenda. Does anything need to be pulled
I did
or
make, I
discussed?
made another correction here in the consent agenda, letter A. We had linked in the special June board meeting agenda. Now it has the minutes in there.
Oh, okay, so it always did say minutes, it was
It
just the
did,
agenda.
just the agenda was
Okay.
linked prior to this morning.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move that.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
So there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is bills. If you have a question on the bills, please state the page number and the bill number. Does anybody have any questions on bills? If not, we're looking for a motion to pay the bills.
I'll move that. I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Does anybody have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is superintendent's report.
Like to start with number 2, with on July 27th, the Pine County Education Leadership Meeting. Rob or I have attended that in the past, and I believe school board members have gone to that. I cannot go on July 27th. That's a phase 2 training that I'd already signed up for. And when I reached out to the Pine County Ed leadership team, they just asked, is there any board members that could go? And then anyone else we could send. So you don't have to answer tonight, but if you could let me know if you could attend that on July 27th. It's usually at the government building in Sandstone. Usually lasts an hour, hour and a half.
This one though, I think is at Pine Tech. I think they switched, at the last one, they talked about switching it so people could get a tour of the new
Oh, I think you're right. Yep.
facility,
I think
so
you're
I'm
right.
pretty sure this one's.
I will verify that and put that in a update to you guys,
Okay.
but if anyone's interested in that, let me know so I can let them know if you're coming. Otherwise, just wanted to hit the attendance part. Again, we've talked about attendance a lot this school year. You can see at least this last year, we did come up 5%. We're still down. We've historically been in that 93 to 95% range. We're still only in the 86% range for the district. Hopefully that will come back as we're coming out of this situation that we're in, but I did want to point that out that our attendance did come up, still not near quite the numbers that we're hoping for with our overall attendance. The other big one that I really wanted to point out, I wanted to do one last high school handbook. So Ms. Hinckley didn't have to, and Val Kunze, who's our new teacher, didn't have to come in and kind of do a whole bunch of changes. I did consult with Val and Brad Jensen on the handbook. They're not recommending any changes from the last ELC handbook that we had. So I'm looking for approval on the same Empower Learning Center handbook for this upcoming school year.
Does anybody have any questions for Brian? My question would be regarding attendance. Would the attendance be associated with illness?
Yeah.
Were they mostly illness, or was this truancy, or
Both.
how do you,
I mean,
how do you know? That-
COVID was a big part of it, and just added illness, not necessarily just COVID, but that's a big part of it. We did have a lot of kids that we had to file truancy or report truancy on. I'll have that number. We had to just submit that at the end of June,
Okay.
so I don't have that. But we did have quite a bit of truancy in all levels this past school year.
But there was still, for part of the year, quarantine, like required
Correct.
quarantines.
Up till, was that February? We still had to do 10, you couldn't test out. Probably February, March, they changed it to you could test out or come back after 5 instead of after 10. So yeah, a good portion of the year, we still had mandatory 10-day quarantines if people tested positive.
Is there any more questions? So Brian is looking for a motion to approve the Empower Learning Center's handbook.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is board committees. Do any board members want to present from committees? No? Okay. Communications, I do not believe there was any communication.
Nope.
We're gonna keep going. Next up, budget calendar.
So in July, we start ordering and receiving the materials. Vonda Beckman does the majority of that down in the district office. Joe France and hopefully soon a technology coordinator will implement the capital budget. Met with Mr. France today, and he said those summer projects in the buildings are coming along nicely. I started working with Jennifer Olander today just to monitor enrollment to see how that's going. She didn't have a lot in the last few weeks since we reported last to the board. There hasn't been a lot of enrollment, but she's assuming usually middle of the month of July towards all the way to the end of August, we get hit with enrollment. So we'll begin to monitor that. And then the final unaudited expenditures for the school year we just completed, you can see we were at 100.85% of the budget, so a little bit over what had been budgeted for. When I talked to Joanne, just what kind of put us over, the biggest part was our utilities, sub costs, and things like that. So we did go over a little bit from the last school year, attributed to, and substitute costs with our utilities. Any questions on the budget calendar?
Moving on to memorandum of understanding.
So working with HFEA, looking for approval on an MOU for when the district hires special ed area licensed teachers for this upcoming school year to continue the stipend of $2,000 as a hiring bonus. As we've deemed those positions are generally the hardest ones to fill. To be eligible, you have to be fully licensed to get that. And you can see the terms laid out, how the pay would go. Working with HFEA, it sounds like they're very supportive of this and would like to see this continued as well.
All right, so that's an action item, correct?
Correct.
So we will need Eric, do you have anything to comment on, since you're in the room?
Yeah, it was, it's always, it's a weird place for us as teachers and as a union, because this is a really new concept, but I guess our union leadership really wants to have good people here, so that was important to us. I don't know, we were kind of crunched for time, so we were, I guess, in-house, we were thinking like, is 2,000 even competitive at this point? And that was a question I had asked Ryan. I don't know, some schools are offering more than that, but that tends to be, a metro type school. And so that was a question that we had, but that was a hard one to tackle.
Scred's the most local one that answered. Scred offers even up to 5,000 at times. Otherwise, our neighbors are either investigating it or hadn't responded. You're right, the metro area does have that more often, but that may be also because they're competing with, there's just many more schools that you can choose from down in the metro area. But
And I'm sure everyone in here is aware, but kind of an ugly reality is that when we first had this conversation, that we first offered these bonuses, it was for SPED positions that were hard to fill, and it's almost like every position has become as hard to fill as what the SPED positions was like 4 or 5 years ago, so that's just it's a tough thing to, I don't know. So some of the inner talkings that we had is maybe in the future we look at offering the bonus to any licensed teacher rather than just focusing on the SPED part. So just wanted to vocalize that for my membership, and I appreciate you asking.
Does anybody have any questions? So I believe we had a motion and a second. We didn't approve yet, though. All in favor? Did we have a motion and a second?
I'll make the motion.
Did I miss
I'll
that?
second it.
Did I say?
There, now we do.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Angela? Sorry, I thought we did. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is meeting dates. Jigger Pride.
It's too far away from here.
No additions to Jigger Pride?
Did we have on here for Jacob Grice? I think he placed second in the trap. Did we have that on there last month? Okay. It was 2A trap.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything else?
I think Angela was helping pull weeds with, Chris Austin.
No, there's a whole group of them. It wasn't just me.
Okay. Next up is meeting details.
Regular school board meetings have rotated between Hinckley and Finlayson, with all special meetings and committee meetings being held in Hinckley. Meeting dates have been the second Monday of the month at 7 p.m. There's also been a 3-hour time limit unless unanimous vote is taken to extend the meeting. I would first recommend continuing that meeting schedule without changes. And then in that, for the reporting schedule, I had just left this the same as what Mr. Prater's used the last few years, as far as what the board education would be each month and who would come do special reports. July, we don't generally have someone. Most staff are off for July, so that's why July is a little less than the other months. But I'm just recommending the same calendar of education and special reports as we've been using. And then the second part, when I was going through the policy reviews or the policy review cycle, you just approved all policies are renewed as of July 1. So all policies are renewed every year, July 1st. But some hadn't had a deep dive for us since about 2015. So I prioritized the ones that had not been looked at deeply to go first. And this is what I'd recommend going forward for this school year. These ones that are highlighted, when I had sent the agenda last week, I forgot their names. So I put their names on there after I had sent it to everyone on Friday.
Okay, is there any questions about the meeting details? Board report schedule or policy review? And we are looking for a motion to accept them.
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is committees.
We do not have a committee policy. If the board wishes, the superintendent can draft a policy to have as far as board members on committees. Past practice has been that the board members request committees and the board chair appoints members to each committees. As of right now, we have 4 or 5 board committees that are open. SCRED alternative, commodities bids, comparable worth, evaluation, and C are still open at this time. And I did add, when I made this committee list, a request was made to then break it out, the second sheet, just each of the committees we have, and then put the names after. So it's saying the same information on both pages, just laid out a little bit different.
So we are looking for somebody to be a SCRED alternate to Heather when she is not available.
Brian, what would be the advantage of having an official committee policy? I think the MSBA has 213 as an official prototype policy.
When I haven't dove very deep into that. When I checked with Mr. Prater, his thought was it kind of says the same thing where it's board members can request, the board chair still gets approval. I haven't dove very deep into that. I certainly can if the board would like me to, but I just talked to Mr. Prater today. We actually checked in and that was one thing we talked about. If the board asks, his thought was that it kind of lays it out the same way. It would just be more formally in one of our policies.
Sure.
Have we ever not had any committee filled? Any positions left vacant for a while?
C is the only one.
So that's
Schools
schools
for
for
equity.
Schools for Equity and Excellence.
Oh, that's all right.
I think they meet quarterly down in Minneapolis.
So, okay, does anybody want to be on any of the 5 committees? Otherwise, I will just assign them.
I'll do the comparable worth.
Just type your name here for now and I'll fix the sheet tomorrow.
Evaluation, what's,
Thank you, Shelley.
what entails that evaluation? How are we evaluating?
We go over, well,
We went over our evaluation policies, which we have for the principals, the managers, the coaches, teachers, just kind of how their boss would evaluate them, things like that. So it's kind of going through those policies, taking those recommendations, if there's any changes that we want to make, but it's kind of how we evaluate the staff.
it means quarterly. It's not a.
Sure, I'll take that.
What is commodities?
Once a year, we go through dairy bids, diesel bids, garbage bids, and there's one more, dairy,
Dairy,
bakery,
bakery.
yeah, garbage and diesel, goes through those bids. The bids get sent out from the district office. When the bids come in sealed, we open them together, make recommendations for the board to approve or what companies we want to go with.
So it's once a year.
You can put me on
It
that.
could be 2 meetings if you don't
This
have,
year it was 2
if you
meetings.
reject them. Okay. No, that's fine.
Heather, you want to be on that?
Yeah, you can put me on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Then I will assign Scred alternate to Toby and C to Toby.
I probably won't be able to attend the C meetings.
Not knowing when they are, you won't be able to attend them? Or are they virtual?
Yeah, if it's virtual, there might be a
They
chance,
have
but
been, like,
I-
I don't know what they're gonna do going
No.
forward. I meet with the C organization gentlemen on Thursday, so I'll know more details on the meeting schedule. I know Mr. Prater's gone in the past, I plan to go this year, whether it's virtual or in person.
Do you want to try if it's virtual, Toby?
Yeah, I could certainly try.
If it doesn't work out, then maybe you can check back and we can find
If
somebody else.
it's not virtual, I won't be able to do it. It just won't work into my schedule.
And I should know more after Thursday what that meeting schedule will look like.
Sure.
They have up to this point, because I get their emails, they have up to this point had a virtual,
Oh, good.
but I don't know if the new year
Yeah,
started,
yeah.
if it'll still.
Yeah, I haven't seen their schedule yet, so.
Julie, I have a question. Is the Hall of Fame considered a committee or not?
I don't believe it's a board.
Okay,
I
I
have
don't
not
know,
been
so-
told it's
I
a
have never been
board.
told it's a board.
if it was, it had to be new, but,
Yeah.
okay.
This is what Mr. Prater sent me as our standing board committees. And
So with that all being said, we will need a motion to, accept the school board committees.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is fees.
Would the board like me to go through each one of these together, or would you like to approve them all together? The only one that had a recommended change in this list was the driver's ed behind the wheel fee, which I'd recommend raising to $250 to be competitive with local costs as they pay their driver, instructor, and fuel costs. I can go through them one at a time, or however the board would like me to do that.
Does anybody have any questions regarding the fees? If there's no questions and we see the change for driver's ed, should we approve all of them in the same motion? So then I'll be looking for a motion to accept the fees as presented.
I'll move that. I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is mileage.
Recommend we continue with the IRS rate, which they just raised to 62.5 cents per mile. This has been our past practice to follow the IRS guidelines. They have increased the mileage rates due to fueling costs. We will still encourage staff to use a district vehicle when available, and when they're going on district business. It helps keep the cost down a little bit.
So we're looking for a motion to accept the mileage rate as presented.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
A second.
There is a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is substitute teacher pay.
I recommend continuing a similar practice to what we did this past school year, where we start substitute teachers out at $155, but moving them to $170 after they sub 10 times. Would recommend starting our retired teachers at $170 and moving that to $180 after 10 days. The increase for retired teachers can be sustained because we don't pay into their TRA anymore. And a lot of times the retired teachers know the students, know the schools, have been in a classroom, can kind of deal with whatever's going to come at them. The local average, as you can see, of the 8 schools that reported is $147.50. I would still recommend this to stay above that right now so we can better assure we'll get substitute teachers. I would also like to just remind the board, last year we did do this in July as well, and then in August we came back and did it again. As our local neighbors haven't set theirs yet, and last year we set it, they had set theirs a little higher. So last year that was what the practice was of the board. I'd like to recommend that what's in front of you, as that keeps us competitive. Hopefully we get substitutes, and I'll bring it back if I hear something from local districts.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Brian, if a substitute teacher is approved at a neighboring school, do they still have to go through the background check?
Yes.
They do, okay.
Yes.
So I'm looking for a motion to accept the substitute teacher pay.
I'll accept it, make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is lunch and breakfast rates.
So the first part, our lunch prices were set at $2.70 last year. When the state comes out with their recommendation, which their recommendation is $3.31, since we're under that recommendation, we have to at least raise our prices 10 cents. So the minimum we would have to do right now with our prices is raise 10 cents because we're under the state recommendation. We have not raised milk rates in 11 years. Even though the milk bid was still a percentage higher, still if we charge a quarter milk, we're doing okay on the milk. So I didn't have any recommendation for changing the milk. Just a few other notes on the lunch program before we get into the recommendations. Like I said, a 10-cent increase is mandated since we're under the 331. Milk bids are still very similar to last year. Owning our own coolers can help keep our costs down for that. Then you can see what we have charged the past few years in lunch. We've been $2.70 since the 18-19 school year. The last 2 years, the federal government has paid all lunches. The other just part I'd like to point out before we get to the recommendations is the state also came up with a recommendation for adult lunches to be priced at $4.20. Any questions on any of that first before I go into any of the recommendations or any clarifying I can do on that? Okay. So then based on that information, I started just pulling some number, just kind of what it costs us to run breakfast, if everything was the same as far as how many meals we serve, things like that. I do think if we go to paying our meal, the number of meals could go down. So these numbers maybe aren't the perfect projection. But if you look at breakfast costs first, just when you include all the parts that go into our breakfast part, it breaks down to break even per se. We would need to charge about $1.65 to $1.66 a breakfast. That did not include bringing in state, federal fees. That would just be if we wanted to take care of that on our own. If you take out the membership, utilities, things like that, just look at food, milk, and supplies, that price is just 80 cents to 81 cents. Just wanted to break down kind of what it looks like to cover that if we wanted to just take care of that ourselves. Same thing for lunch. Again, if we charge lunch or when we charge lunch, I would assume usage might go down. But roughly to break even on a lunch, we would have to charge between $4.69 and $4.70 a lunch. Again, that's not including state and federal fees that we will get. But just wanted to give some math on that, what that looks like. My recommendation, if we go to breakfast cost, and the elementary and the high school would be the same. So breakfast, they use the same rule for breakfast since we're under the state lunch average. They want us to up that at least 10 cents. So last school year in all buildings for breakfast, we were at $1.20. The minimum price we would have to go up is to the $1.30. I just put in a price if what our bakery raise was about 7%, so what that would be. My recommendation for the breakfast was $1.40. Rationale was just we hadn't raised it for a couple of years. It gets us a little bit closer to where we should be, at least what the state would like us to be. I don't know if you want to do this all together, Jody, with breakfast and lunch, or have you talked through all that?
Well,
I'll just go through and then see what.
let's go through and
Okay.
then see. who-
Lunch is the
the
same,
motion
we price the same no matter their elementary lunch or secondary lunch. So this past school year, we were at $2.70. The minimum we need to go up to is $2.80. If you raise just by the percentage of what the bakery cost was, that, you can see what that math would be at $2.89. The state is recommending $3.31. My recommendation, I kind of split the difference on that, where we were at $2.70. The state's recommending $3.31. I put my recommendation at $3, as we hadn't raised it for a few years. So if the 2 years you didn't count the raise, plus this upcoming school year, that's where I came up with the 30-cent increase for both the elementary and the high school lunch. The last one, there really isn't the math breakdown. It's just what we charge the adult lunches. Only 5 other school districts reported that they also charge adult lunch. That average was $4.14. We were at $3.85. I just went with the state recommendation of $4.20, as really if you go get a lunch somewhere in town, you're gonna pay more than $4.20. So I just strictly went with the state recommendation on adult lunch. Adult breakfast, the state did not come out with any averages. I can't speak for the elementary that well. I don't see a lot in the high school. I could be wrong on that. I just recommending keep our adult breakfast the same at $2.25. And then I'm not recommending any changes for milk, with where our lunch or milk bids are and what they're charging us per carton. We're doing okay at 25 cents per carton.
Does anybody have any questions for Brian?
I have a question. It's kind of a silly question, but for lunch, now for elementary versus high school, do the students get the same amount of lunch?
The portions are supposed to be different. I know in the high school level, that was something we really worked on this year, and it got better as the year goes on. The proportion should be a little bit more as they get older. So the elementary should get less food, smaller bodies. That's something I know at the high school level we worked on all year, even from the junior high to the senior high lunches, to kind of try. It got better as the year went on. Something that I would still work with stay on.
Well, because I'm just thinking if the elementary students
Say
don't get
portions,
as,
not promotions.
get small,
Portions.
they get smaller portions, either, they can be charged a little less, or the high school just gets charged a little more. If it's portion sizes, if I had 3 elementary students and they're paying the same as high school, I don't know, that's just me. Maybe you guys have other views?
So are we pushing a free and reduced lunch? I mean, are these numbers reflect any of that, or?
Well, last year everyone ate, so those
Yeah.
numbers where I gave you is everyone was eligible to eat. What we will do as soon as the board sets is, it did put that letter out, it'll be in the newspaper this week, and we put it on Facebook last week just to let the public know that right now they're not free. We will set out and push the free and reduced applications. Now, once the dollar amount is set, then we'll send out that form letter and the application that goes with it. We hope to do that this week, but yes, we will push that, because it doesn't only benefit our lunch costs, but it can benefit other programs in the district too.
And I think the sooner, sorry, go
No, go
through.
ahead, Jody.
I think the sooner that it gets out that the federal government is not paying for lunches, hopefully the applications will come in.
Right.
And people won't be surprised by it.
Right. That's why I wanted to put it out last week, even though it hadn't been set yet, just, hey, this is coming. We've got notice that the federal government right now is not paying for it. And we'll continue to put that message out all summer.
Brian, what's typically in the breakfast big lunch? Is it like a banana or an apple and then like a bakery item and then?
At the high school level, yeah. Yeah, it's a fruit, a muffin. Kids like donut Fridays, but it's kind of a grab and go, a juice and some fruit and maybe a muffin or a roll.
There's cheese sticks.
Yep.
Yogurts.
Is
They
milk,
kind of ride.
is milk an option?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And then breakfast, that's just served for, from what time to what time then?
Next school year, the doors will open at 8:05 to 8:20.
Okay.
I guess I kind of agree with what Shelley's saying. I mean, if they're getting less, is there any way we could either lower or, I mean, just to have a little bit more of a,
I would like to know how much less.
Certainly find that out. I don't know that off the top of my head.
So I guess I'm looking for a motion to accept the lunch and breakfast rate that's presented.
So again, that would be the breakfast cost of $1.40, lunch costs of $3, adult lunch at $4.20, and adult breakfast $2.25, milk standing at a quarter.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
So we'll do roll call.
I guess.
Are you ready, Dave, for a roll call?
God.
Leo is
Yes.
Angela.
No.
Shelley,
No.
Toby,
No.
Heather,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
and I was yes. So the motion does not pass, right? Or the motion passes.
Yeah.
It's Monday.
I was on vacation. I worked on days. Trying to get it together. Okay, the motion passes 4-3. Am I right?
Yep.
Moving on. Next is the employee and board member meal reimbursements. Does anybody have any questions regarding those reimbursements?
I didn't have any recommended changes. Last they were raised was in the 2010-11 school year.
Any questions for Brian? So I'm looking for a motion to accept the employee and board member meal rate.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next up is school board compensation that is presented.
Had no recommended changes from the past. Looking back at some notes, the last of these again were raised in 2010-11. The officer pay was increased in the 13-14 school year. Mileage is paid at the official rate from home to meeting site. Please carpool when possible, and check with the superintendent on out-of-district meetings for van and or carpool options. Payment claims are turned in the first of the month, and then make sure you turn that mileage in, because after over 60 days, it can be taxable.
Does anybody have any questions regarding that?
I guess I would just like to say the chairman, since we do have a new superintendent and there is newer board members, the amount of time that it takes, I guess I think that could be increased. I don't know what anybody else's thoughts are on it, but
You have a dollar amount you were thinking?
not specifically, no.
I agree. I think it is a very time-consuming job, and the average person doesn't realize how much time is spent by the chairperson and the superintendent.
Do we know what other districts are paying there?
I looked at so Rob had pulled this, and I couldn't find any school districts that reported on school board compensation.
Do we do this every year?
Yes.
I say just keep it the same since I'm the chairman.
I guess my motion would be to all of them the same except chair go up to 600 annually.
Is that a motion?
That's my motion.
I'd second that motion.
So there's a motion and a second, but I would abstain because I'm the chair. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Official newspaper.
Recommend, so now, if you remember back to last school year, we moved down to one newspaper. So to continue with the North Pine County News as our official newspaper for this school year. They had raised their rates, so had Joanne just kind of look at what we had used in the past. A little bit harder because we use two newspapers, but she's recommending $3,800 should cover that cost.
Does anybody have any questions? My only question is if that was, the 3,800 was calculated off of what we really put in it, not off, because last year we went over.
Yep.
So if we know we're gonna go over, why don't we just budget for it to begin with?
So last year, when I looked at last July's board agenda, the number that you approved was 3,500 for two newspapers. When I had Joanne kind of run the numbers, we had spent closer to 6,000 on that. So obviously it got reduced to one newspaper, so reduced in half. And she budgeted based on their rates and what they'd kind of billed us in the past. She thought we were very covered with 3,800.
Okay. Is there a motion then to, or does anybody have any more questions? Is there a motion to accept the official newspaper of the North Pine County News?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is bid committee recommendations.
So for diesel bids, we did have two bids. Kurt's Cenex was one bid. They presented the price on a fleet card with a volume discount of up to 5 cents per gallon. Taxes exempt built into the fleet card, diesel at the pump price and unleaded at the pump price. Slim Service also presented price on fleet card with volume discount up to 6 cents per gallon, tax-free upfront. The savings, if we went with this option, could be $249.42 for the year, not the month, the year. Savings based on this year's, so when we calculated this, we based it on this past school year's gallons that were used. The bid committee recommends Kurt Cenex. The committee also recommended that the Type 3 vehicles use Slim Service. The committee also recommended that the transportation pilots fueling buses at Slim Service each month and on different days of the week. So when we come to the bid process next year, we have more data to make that decision if the same two companies bid.
And Leo, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the main concerns with Slims is the corner of 61 and 48. And we took the recommendation from the transportation department. But with that being said, we did ask buses to use it to see what they actually find out instead of just assuming that it is going to be congestion at that area and with the train tracks being so close. So that's where it comes in, the piloting, the fueling buses at different times of the day and different days of the week to make sure that maybe it's not an issue. And next year, we can make our recommendation off of the facts.
In the past, I think Toby's has bid, bus bids once or twice. And if I remember correctly, that was kind of rejected for basically a safety reason and Quick Trip. They're crossing the freeway, and so we're trying to be fair to our second bidder that let's find out the truth about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they also are supposed to do it throughout the year. So I mean, it's not supposed to be just fall. We want them to test it in the winter and everything,
Yeah.
so.
So do they run a credit card for each piece of machinery?
I believe, no, I think it's just one or
I think
two.
the school would have a handful from that we could check out was the idea.
From what I understand is, these fleet cards will do all kinds of data for you. So let's just imagine if a driver had a number, bus had a number, and a credit card for that bus. Let's say you had it on the key ring. So, you put in the mileage, so you wanna know what the driver mileage is, you know what the bus mileage is. It does usually those are free reports. And that way if, someone's closed, they automatically get a credit card because it's with the key. Used to do that in the past, some time ago, and, that seemed to work pretty well, rather than, there was even a system for a while where the business had the credit cards in a book, but then when the business is closed, you can't buy anything, so. Anyway, that worked pretty well to have a card for each unit, and then, every driver had their own secret number. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. All I got.
Like to do dairy?
Sure.
Next. If you remember, the board asked, Mr. Prater, myself, and the bid committee to kind of go back and rebid the dairy products. We did get another bid from Sandstrom's. So you can see the prices that the three companies came in at, where Beverage Solutions was quite a bit lower than both Prairie Farms and Sandstrom's. Prairie Farm we have used in the past, also didn't have the best customer experience. So what the bid committee is recommending is to continue with Beverage Solutions for the 22-23 school year due to cost, and we also haven't had a great experience with Prairie Farm, which is what most of our neighbors do use.
And the only thing there to note is when we have had spoiled milk or dirty milk cartons, we have been
We have been
reimbursed
credited, correct.
for that. I guess we took that into consideration.
Beverage Solution.
Through Beverage
Mhm.
Solutions, yeah. We have-
So even by the lowest bidder, it's still 28. I can't do the math.
Close to 30,000.
Almost $28,500.
Yeah.
Do you know what brand milk beverage solution it was? I never off the top of my head.
It was,
Well, I
like-
can see it in there.
it was under Kemp's, but I'm not sure if that's a brand we use.
I say it's not, the carton doesn't say Kemp.
Okay, because it is the same treaty for Kemp's.
That's a beverage solution.
If we can't find it, I can get it to you.
Is it-
Yeah,
That's just my
Kemp's
brand.
is done bidding
I
now.
can get it to you.
Thank you.
This beverage solution somehow is bidding, but I'm not positive they're using their product.
I can find out and get back to the board on that.
Is there any feedback, have you received any feedback from other school districts that might use beverage solutions and what their experience with them are?
Most didn't. When we reached out, it was Prairie Farm, but well over the majority. Most didn't use Beverage Solutions. They did use Prairie Farm. I don't know if they just didn't get a bid from Beverage Solutions. Or Prairie Farm is what our local area schools are using.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons that beverage solution's so cheap is they had a lawsuit against them that they lost, so they have to keep the price at a certain price till 2030, I believe the year was, so otherwise it would be way higher. And I think Brian said that he would write letters to people if we do have issues with the milk.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions? So I'm looking for a motion to accept the bids of the dairy, the diesel.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is, bus driver pay.
So we are still working on finishing the final touches of the language in the support staff agreement. As we were doing that, we wanted to get that ready for July, but just with the timeline, we just couldn't get everything nailed down by last Friday to have this done. But we realized summer school's coming, and the bus drivers would like to have their salary wages approved. So I'm recommending the negotiated bus driver wages for approval for this school year.
Is there a motion to accept the bus driver pay?
I'll move that.
Do we have a second?
One second.
There's a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up are the changes to the school calendar.
So I'd like to make the recommendation of making a change to our school calendar. Working with our activities director, Mandy Hartle, where we currently have high school conferences in the fall set for. We have sporting events that we cannot move. We've tried with the other school district to move those. We cannot. It's also the week of homecoming. Being in the high school in the past, I've heard loud and clear. I know that's not a good thing to have homecoming conferences and all these athletic events in the same week. If for no other reason, because we have so many coaches that wouldn't be available at conferences. Right now, I would anticipate conferences being back in person. So I'd like to make the recommendation to change our school calendar where we move high school conferences up a week, which those dates still correlate with the mid-quarter date, which I know the calendar committee wanted for high school conferences to have those right around mid-quarter. So I'd like to make that recommendation to move conferences up a week, only in the high school, only in the fall for next school year.
So we're looking for a motion to accept the school calendar with the change of conferences being moved to October 6th and 10th.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Next up is the policy 714.
So I'm gonna be honest, I put this as an action item because honestly, I didn't know how the board wanted to handle this. I'll jump to the discussion. In the past, in July, on the board agenda, you would have seen this health and safety policies down through the attachment 10 in the consent agenda. Was working with Rob mostly because it had something to be determined, and I had just asked him, how do we figure out who the to be determined is? He said, send the whole list to Scott George at Resource, which you can see his name on the list, and get his input. So when I sent this list to Scott George, he said, that's kind of old practice. Boards don't typically do that anymore. What he recommended, he called it policy 807. We actually have the exact recommendation Scott George sent me as policy 714, which I have here. He said this policy 714 covers what is needed for the health and safety protocol, as it's really just the board telling administration, telling the staff that we're gonna do the drills, we're gonna make sure our buildings are safe, clean, clean, we'll stay with that word, and make sure that we're following these policies, bloodborne pathogens. He said that policy that we already have covers all the things that we used to do in the list. The board just approved policy 714 back in May. We don't need to reapprove it. I didn't know if the board wanted to approve that this is the new policy for how we address all those things. If we wanted it just a discussion item, we are meeting what's needed, what we used to do by having policy 714.
What's the difference between 807 and 714?
I don't know why ours is called 714. When I looked on MSBA, it is the same thing that we have. We just already have it called 714. It is the exact same. What Scott George sent me as 807 was what we already had word for word in 714.
So I guess, do we have an 807? If MSBA recognizes it as 807, so does he, should we?
We
switch
do
it
not
to-
have an 807.
Should we switch it to 807 so it's all,
Same form?
so it's all the same?
Sure.
I mean, in case we have
I
to
think
look
that's
it
a good
up for
idea.
some reason.
Sorry.
So I'll make that motion to change policy 714 to 807.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 7-0. And we have reached the end of the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Any second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.